Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard here, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll have another new lens from Lumix. This is the Lumix S2460 f2.8. It is a very compact standard zoom lens with f2.8 constant maximum aperture. It is a lot smaller, lighter and cheaper than the Lumix S Pro 2470 f2.8. On paper, the only difference between these two lenses is that the telephoto end of this new lens is 10mm shorter. So in this review, we'll have a look at the performance image quality of this new lens, and I'll be doing some side-by-side comparison with the Lumix S Pro 2470 2.8 to see what are the trade-offs of this new lens and could this be a great choice for L-mount users. Okay, we'll start by looking at the image quality of this new lens. If we look at 24mm focal length, at f2.8, the center of this Lumix S2460 is already very sharp. There doesn't seem to be any difference when I compare it with the Lumix S Pro 2470, even at 200% zoom. When I stop down these lenses, there is virtually no difference to the sharpness, as both of these lenses were already very sharp at f2.8. Image sharpness remains excellent until around f11, and then diffraction was starting to soften the image. Now let's have a look at the corner. Both lenses are a little bit soft, but surprisingly, the Lumix S2460 is a bit sharper than the Lumix S Pro 2470. The corner sharpness becomes quite good at f4, and it seems the Lumix S2460 is just sharper than the S Pro 2470 at the corner at this focal length. Now one thing is, in this review we are doing all these image tests using the 44 megapixel Lumix S1R2, and now we are looking at the sharpness at 200% zoom. So it is more demanding than my usual reviews that I test with a 24 megapixel camera. Okay, now let's have a look at the tele end, 60mm focal length. At the center, the Lumix S2460 is quite sharp at f2.8. Very similar to the S Pro 2470, then it becomes very sharp from f4 onwards. Once again, there really isn't too much difference between these two lenses. And now look at the corner. At the maximum aperture, the Lumix S2460 is a little bit soft. This time, the Lumix S Pro 2470 is better. We need to stop down the lens to f5.6 for the corner of the Lumix S2460 to become sharp. The Lumix S Pro 2470 has better sharpness in this area. The minimum focus distance of this lens is 0.19 meter from the wide end to 30mm focal length. Then the minimum focus distance will increase to 0.33 meter at the tele end. The maximum magnification is 0.3 times, which is pretty good, and it is at 30mm focal length. In comparison, the Lumix S Pro 2470 is 0.25 times, which is not bad, but it's not quite as good as the Lumix S2460. This photo was shot at the minimum focus distance at f2.8, and it is already pretty sharp. Bokeh from the Lumix S2460 is alright. The transition from foreground to background is quite nice, and it doesn't look distracting. There isn't much that I can complain, but at the same time, it is not really that special. But if we compare it with the Lumix S Pro 2470, bokeh from the Lumix S2460 is slightly smoother. The edge of the bokeh balls dissolve nicely into the background. It seems a bit better than the Lumix S Pro 2470. And now let's look at vignetting. If we enable vignetting correction, at 24mm focal length, the Lumix S2460 has small but noticeable amount of vignetting at f2.8. Vignetting would disappear almost completely when we stop down to f5.6. The Lumix S Pro 2470 has better vignetting performance at 24mm focal length. And if we disable vignetting correction at 24mm focal length, the Lumix S 2460's vignetting is very obvious at f2.8, but it would improve quite a lot if we stop down to f4. If we continue to stop down the lens more, there would still be a bit of vignetting. The Lumix S Pro 2470's vignetting performance is better at 24mm. Now let's switch to the Teddy N 60mm focal length. With vignetting correction enabled, both lenses have very minimal amount of vignetting. Even at f2.8, vignetting is almost not visible. And if we disable vignetting correction, vignetting is still quite minimal. The Lumix S 2460 has a little bit more vignetting at f2.8 than the Lumix S Pro 2470. But if you look at these photos, vignetting is really minor considering these were shot at the f2.8 maximum aperture. And once we stop down to f4, then vignetting is barely noticeable. Chromatic aberration control is quite decent. I don't really see much color fringing in all my photos, including some photos with very high contrast. But I do think the Lumix S Pro 2470 has slightly better chromatic aberration performance than the Lumix S 2460. Look at these local test photos. The Lumix S 2460 is not bad, but there is a little bit more color fringing than the Lumix S Pro 2470. We'll look at distortion now. If we enable distortion correction, the distortion control is very good with both lenses. The Lumix S 2460 has slightly less distortion than the Lumix S Pro 2470 at 24mm focal length. At 40mm and 60mm, both lenses are pretty much the same. The distortion control are very good with both lenses, so it doesn't really matter when you are taking real-world photos. Now if we disable the distortion control, the difference is much bigger now. At 24mm focal length, the Lumix S 2460 has small amount of barrel distortion, while the Lumix S Pro 2470 has more noticeable distortion. At 40mm, both lenses performs very well, and at 60mm, this time is the Lumix S 2460 that has more noticeable pincushion distortion, while the Lumix S Pro 2470's distortion is not very obvious. So in terms of distortion control, the Lumix S 2460 is better at the wide end, while the Lumix S Pro 2470 is better at the Teddy end. Lens flare control is very good with this Lumix S 2460. There is very minimal amount of lens flare even when there is a strong light source in front of the camera. When I compare it with the Lumix S Pro 2470, the lens flare performance is quite similar. Both are excellent, but it seems this new Lumix S 2460 actually has slightly better lens flare control than the Lumix S Pro 2470. If you want to get some Sunstars from the Lumix S 2460, you will need to stop down the lens a lot to at least around f11, then you will start to see Sunstars. But I don't really like how the tails of the Sunstars would spread out quite a bit at f11, so I would stop down the lens all the way to the minimum aperture f22 to get pointy Sunstars. Having said that, I think the Sunstars from the Lumix S 2460 is still better than the Lumix S Pro 2470. Sunstars from the Lumix S Pro 2470 looks really messy. Even when I stop down to f22, the Sunstars still doesn't look nice at all. When taking photos, autofocus is very fast with this Lumix S 2460. It will snap into the target very quickly without any hunting. The autofocus operation is also very quiet. And when we shoot video, autofocus is also very responsive when I test it with the Lumix S1R2. This combo managed to follow my movement very quickly. While this lens is not a pro level lens, I don't think anyone will be disappointed by this lens autofocus performance. This Lumix S2460 has excellent focus breathing control. There is very minimal amount of focus breathing at both the wide end and the telephoto end. Actually, the Lumix S Pro 2470 is also excellent in this area as well. I was quite surprised when I took this Lumix S2460 out from the box. Panasonic has briefed me and they already told me one of the biggest selling point of this lens is how small this lens is, but still I didn't expect such a small lens. This lens is only a little bit bigger than the Lumix S2060 kit lens, and it is much smaller than the Lumix S Pro 2470 f2.8. It is also quite a bit smaller than the already very compact Tamron 2875 f2.8 lens. The only f2.8 full-frame zoom lens that is similar in size is the Sigma 2870 f2.8. The height is very similar, but the Lumix has a larger diameter. The zoom range of this Lumix lens is exactly the same as the Sigma. Both lenses are 2.5 times zoom. But the Sigma is a bit longer, it starts at 28mm focal length, while the Lumix starts at 24mm. It is easier to make the lens more compact when you don't have to go really wide. That's why a lot of the smaller zoom lenses in the market start at 28mm focal length, like the Sigma and the Tamron, or even Lumix own 28-200 starts at 28mm. So it's quite an achievement that Lumix managed to make this lens similar size to the Sigma, but it can go as wide as 24mm focal length. I mentioned many times on this channel before, for a standard zoom lens, I always prefer if the lens can go a bit wider rather than longer. It's because when the wide end is not wide enough, there really isn't much that you can do unless you take multiple photos and then merge them together during editing, which isn't always practical or even doable. Or if you are shooting video or especially vlogging style video, 28mm focal length is just a little bit too tight. While on the other hand, if the tele end is slightly not long enough, you can always just crop the photo or video a little bit. You can crop 10-20% easily without any noticeable drop in resolution. The weight of this Lumix S2460 is about 550 grams. So it is way lighter than the Lumix S Pro 2470, which is almost double the weight. Now, while this Lumix S2460 f2.8 is not exactly as small or as light as the Lumix S2060, it's still compact and light enough that I definitely won't mind carry with me for my next overseas trip. I can't say the same for the Lumix S Pro 2470, which is just a lot bigger and heavier. In terms of build quality, the body is mostly made of plastic, but it feels solid and good quality. The overall build quality feels somewhere in between the Lumix S Pro 2470 and the Lumix S2060. The lens would extend when you zoom in. The zoom ring rotates quite easily, similar to the Lumix S2060, but it feels a bit smoother. Unlike the Lumix S Pro 2470, it doesn't have that manual focus clutch design. It only has the normal manual focus ring. But if you are shooting with Lumix cameras, from the Lumix S1-2 onwards, you can customize the manual focus ring to control other settings instead. For example, aperture, exposure compensation. there are 2 pages of settings that you can assign to the manual focus ring. This customizable manual focus ring feature is also coming to some of the existing lenses via firmware update in the future. There is a AF/MF switch, and then we have a brand new button on the lens which is called the focus button. So by default, when you press this button, it will stop the autofocus. But you can custom assign it to other features. If you go into the camera menu, go to the lens section, then there are a total of 6 pages of options that is available for you to choose. And you can also assign a different setting for the photo mode and the video and S&Q mode. This button is compatible with the S1 II, S1 IIe and S1 R2 by firmware update. The front filter thread is 77mm and it is a weatherproof lens. The lens hood is a reversible one. From the model number printed on the lens hood, it appears to be the same lens hood as the Lumix S24105. This Lumix S2460 f2.8 lens was a bit of a surprise to me. First, even though this lens has been on the roadmap for quite a while, I wasn't expecting it will be released with the Lumix S1 II, and I was also a bit surprised that the wide end is 24mm, not 28mm. And even with the 24mm wide end, somehow Lumix still managed to make the lens so compact. But not only that, the picture quality is really not bad at all. Look at all the comparison results with the Lumix S Pro 2470 2.8, which is a professional lens that is about twice the price. This new compact zoom lens managed to keep up in most areas. And actually, things like close-up and Sunstars, this new lens actually performs even better than the Lumix S Pro 2470. So I think this lens is a winner for Lumix. It is very compact, price is very reasonable, and image quality is decent. And it works really well no matter you are a photographer or a videographer. If you are someone like me who prefer to have a standard zoom lens that is a bit wider, then this lens would be a fantastic choice for you. I really won't be surprised if many people will now consider Lumix full frame cameras just because of this lens.